Welcome to the Spiritist Companion podcast. My name is Yuri Castro, and I'll be your companion on this journey where we study, reflect, and put Spiritist teachings into practice. If this helps you in any way, please consider subscribing, following the pages, and sending this podcast to someone else as well. My dear friends, today's topic takes us to the very heart of the Christian message. Who is Jesus? Not was. Who is Jesus? What is the nature of Christ? And why does Jesus occupy such a special place within the Spiritist understanding? What does it mean to have Jesus as our guide and model? To explore these questions, we'll draw especially from posthumous works by Allan Kardec, as well as teachings found in the Gospel according to Spiritism and the Spirit's Book. So let's reflect together. When we think about Jesus, we may think of the Master who walked the roads of Galilee. We may think of the Christ who healed, comforted, taught, and welcomed those around him. For Spiritism, however, our understanding of Jesus reaches an even deeper, I would say, even wider dimension. Question 625 from the Spirit's Book. Allan Kardec is going to ask, what is the most perfect type that God has offered humanity as a guide and model? And the Spirit's answer is very simple: Jesus. And Kardec even adds an extraordinary, per se, explanation when he says that for man, Jesus constitutes the type of moral perfection toward which humanity can aspire on earth. And here, we find one of the central ideas of today's episode. Jesus represents the highest model of moral development offered to humanity on earth. He demonstrates through his own existence, through everything that he has done and continues to do, what we can develop within ourselves: humility, charity, forgiveness, faith, compassion, love. In the book Posthumous Works, which was published after Kardec died, as the title kind of implies, back in 1890, we're going to see an extensive study on the nature of Jesus. Allan Kardec, the author, will examine different arguments concerning Christ's identity, mission, and spiritual nature. And obviously these were done before he passed away, but published after he passed away. And one of the central points of the codifier's reflection is precisely the exceptional nature of Jesus and the greatness of his mission. And if we make a parallel here, we have the Gospel according to Spiritism as well, where we're going to see that Jesus' authority came from the exceptional nature of his Spirit and from his divine mission. Exceptional nature. I think this deserves a little bit of our attention, because Jesus represents a spirit at an extraordinarily advanced stage of development. As a matter of fact, he's of the highest order and highest class, as the spirits have told us. His superiority, we can see expressed above all through his moral character. When he teaches forgiveness and offer forgiveness, he teaches charity and practice charity. He teaches humility and demonstrates humility, and above all, teaching love and living love. I think Jesus' message carries extraordinary power because his own life becomes an expression of what he teaches. Jesus as our guide and model, going back to the answer of question 625. And I think this is a great contribution that Spiritism has to the world, because when we think of guide and model, I think we have a very practical idea here. Because we can ask ourselves, how would Jesus respond? So let's say when we are offended, how can I respond with greater understanding? How would Jesus respond in my place? When I find someone that is suffering, how can I offer comfort as Jesus would? When an opportunity to serve appears, how can I turn this into an expression of charity? When we face some difficulty, which we talked a lot about in this podcast, how can I move through it with the trust and the serenity taught by Christ? My dear friends, I think that in that manner, Jesus becomes more than a figure we admire. He becomes a reference point for our decisions. We learn through the Gospel according to Spiritism that Jesus is one who came to develop and to expand humanity's understanding of God's law. His mission brought humanity a deeper vision of our relationship with God and with one another. And what lies at the center of this message? Love. Jesus summarizes the law in two great commandments. Love God above all things. Love your neighbor as yourself. And the codifier of Spiritism, Allan Kardec, observes that these teachings express the essence of charity and offer a reliable guide for our relationships. And I think it's difficult to imagine guidance that is simpler and at the same time more profound. And also it's very hard to apply, but it is simple to understand. Also in posthumous works, Kardec carefully examines the nature of Jesus, considering the concept of Christ's dual nature, examining the implications of a human nature associated with a divine nature. He observes how this discussion carries great importance because it relates directly to the exceptional authority of Jesus' teachings. But he also highlights the fact that for centuries and centuries we have been debating and a lot of blood has been spilled because some would say that Jesus is God or they're the same being. Others will say that they're different, and then people would fight about it. And Kardec is saying we have to focus on what he said to, number one, decrypt this message, and number two, let's focus on the teachings, on applying the teachings. Kardec's study seeks to rationally understand Jesus' extraordinary position within humanity's spiritual history. And for Spiritism, this reflection connects directly with something deeply practical, which is the more we understand the spiritual greatness of Christ, the greater our motivation becomes to follow his example. But there's also a profound difference between admiring Jesus and allowing Jesus to transform our lives. We can admire his history, admire his parables, we can study his teachings, but there is one step beyond that, living them. A true encounter with Christ, I think, happens when his message begins influencing our choices. When a disagreement calls for patience, when someone needs forgiveness, when another person needs help, when pride seeks attention, or when an opportunity to serve appears. In these moments, my dear friends, the gospel leaves the pages of a book and enter our lives truly. It's not uncommon for us to refer to Jesus as our spiritual mentor. And the word mentor can be especially helpful in understanding this relationship, I think. Because a mentor guides, a mentor inspires, shows us a path, offers an example. And Jesus, well, he does all of this on an extraordinary spiritual level. He gives us a direction, and that direction, again, can be summarized in one word, my dear friends: love. Love for God, love for our neighbor, for ourselves, for life, for truth. Love expressed through service. As our guide and mentor and model, Jesus is also moving through storms alongside his disciples, and that's something we often see when he was here with us. This image, and I think, can represent our lives because the storm is part of the journey, but Christ represents the direction. So when life seems confusing, we can return to one essential question. What teaching of Jesus can guide my next decision? Sometimes it will be patience, other times forgiveness or charity, sometimes maybe humility. The gospel offers different answers, I think, for different moments, and sometimes a little bit of everything in one same moment. The Spirits present Jesus in the Spirit's book as the model of moral perfection toward which humanity can aspire. That means that Jesus represents a direction for our own development. Every virtue we cultivate brings our character closer to that model. Every act of charity, of forgiveness, of humility, like I was mentioning before, all of these contribute to our journey toward spiritual growth. We look at Jesus and we can see somebody that has already achieved that spiritual perfection we talk about. Like I said, first order, first class of spirit. His patience invites our own patience. His humility awakens our own humility. So we look at him, we see these qualities, and we know we can still develop those qualities within ourselves. His relationship with God inspires our own spiritual search, I think. So how can we put Jesus at the center of our lives, understanding who Jesus actually is? We can begin with simple questions, and I alluded to this before already. So before responding to a provocation, which response comes closest to Jesus' teaching? Or before judging someone, how can I understand this person with greater charity? When facing a difficult situation, a life's storm, which virtue is this experience inviting me to develop? Because I think one of the greatest tribute we can offer our dear Master Jesus is to live what he taught. Jesus can occupy an increasingly deeper place in our lives through the choices that we make. So, my dear friends, when we ask, who is Jesus? We can find many ways to answer that. To the world, he's one of the most important figures in history. To Christians, he is the master. For Spiritism, we find an additional, even maybe deeply practical understanding, our guide and model. A spirit of exceptional nature. A being whose mission transformed humanity's moral path, and somebody who's still watching over us. Perhaps our greatest opportunity is to bring our own lives increasingly closer to that example. Today we can choose a more loving word. Tomorrow we can practice greater patience. On another occasion we can offer forgiveness. We can serve. And little by little I think that Christ ceases to be merely someone we admire from a distance. He then becomes someone we follow. Perhaps that is the deepest meaning of having Jesus as our mentor and guide, allowing his light to illuminate our choices until, through our own effort, and that's going to take a long time, that light also begins to shine within us. My dear friends, thank you so much for being with me in this episode of the Spiritist Companion podcast, this time episode 63. I hope this reflection brought something meaningful to your heart, and if it did, please share it with someone else who may be also seeking to better understand Jesus and draw closer to his teachings. Until the next episode, with fraternal love, your Spiritist Companion.